Hey everybody, it's Mike at conventioNOT. Thanks so much for tuning in today as Ryan and I catch up over our first official coronavirus episode. Yep, that's where we're at right now. This thing's gone global, and we're all in this together. Instead of freaking out and being irresponsible, I want everyone to just take the time to sit back and relax. We're going to get through this. Ryan and I wanted to catch up with one another as we regularly do, but be more specific about some of the immediate kind of thoughts and concerns we're having, some steps we're taking personally, and also offer some advice on some ideas that we're personally looking forward to, ideas of self-improvement and, some self-evaluation over this time. It's a very, very unique time. We need to find a way to take advantage and find the good through all of this. So I want to encourage everyone to keep your heads up. If you're having a hard time doing that, hang around for the next hour or so. Ryan and I will do our best. How you doing, bud?
I'm not sick with the corona.
Well, yeah, no, that's appropriate. So it's March 20th, 2020. We don't normally get real specific on dates of recording, but we're just beyond a week into this like full-blown U.S. stuff's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, honestly, that's such a trivial way to explain it, but I think that's a really important part of it is that, like, well, when and where have you been in order to, like, that completely dictates your feelings and understanding and, like, how long you've been dealing with this, like people in China, this is old news, you know what I mean? But people in Hawaii, this is becoming very real now. You know what I mean? I guess that's maybe a more succinct way to put it, is that it seems like it got real in the United States within the past week. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. Yeah. I think we'll look back on it and everything will be debated. Georgia's pretty red, pretty like Republican state. So there's not really been any sort of legal mandate like perhaps there's been in some other places across the country. However, it's been pretty well discouraged, whether it be by the business owners, something I want to make sure we talk about, which, I know I've been reaching out to you all week just to kind of talk about the impact on the world and people's jobs and what they're doing. I think it's worth recording today. Again, like you said.
I do too. Yesterday was the day that the governor of California came out and said, don't leave your houses, which to me, I'm sure every day maybe we're going to have like something significant occur. But California is a pretty, they're usually pretty liberal and laid back about things, like not like this necessarily, but about things in general. And to my knowledge, that's the first statewide. I mean, that they can't police that, right? They can't force people to stay in their homes. But to my knowledge, that in the U.S., that's the first statewide directive, basically, to, like in Hawaii, for example, it's been very much like in the past few days ramping up, and now, groups of 10 very much discouraged. And, now it's like need basis. Social gatherings aren't a need basis. But our governor hasn't come out and said, don't leave your houses. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's gnarly, dude. Like, that's a lot of this is straight out of a movie, right? But
straight out of a lot of movies.
Every movie, unfortunately, every movie, they start like this.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. There's a map that I've been monitoring pretty close of the hot zones. And so I guess I'm not sure.
Worldwide or U.S.?
U.S. Okay. U.S. And so it seems that regardless of the clinical danger of the illness, which appears to be very grave, if you want my opinion, I'm not a clinician, but it appears to be pretty grave. There's kind of this thing, like you say, with California in between being legally prevented, it's against the law, or we discourage you. I mean, I like to think as Americans, and I think it's important to keeping the peace as Americans that we do keep requesting that, not requiring that. But I guess there is a threshold, right? There's a threshold of a curfew, probably.
I mean, is that a state? And neither one of us knows this nonsense, but like, is that a state enforceable, city enforceable, county enforceable thing? Or is that like when the federal, like, is that the National Guard is going to be out police? Right? I mean,
that's a really good question. I don't know.
I've never been, since we were kids. Even then, curfew wasn't like that real. But in theory, as a kid in Michigan, you could get ticketed by police officers when we were younger for being out at a certain time of night. That's not what we're talking about, but that's the only thing I've ever experienced. It wasn't ever enforced.
I would suspect that Americans are farly divided on the enforceability of it. And I don't know, man. I just pointed to a lot of the bullshit that we've maybe been through preceding up to this. We're not in a good shape to handle what we're doing, Just before I popped on the show, you have to pardon any of the background noises, I guess, at either of our house, because obviously we're quarantined with entire families, today. But just before I jumped on the microphone, I was looking at a video that Anna was showing me of Trump interacting with a reporter, in which the question is important. The question is important because I think it shows its simplicity. But the reporter, in essence, is asking, "Hey, do you think you should consider federal sanctions?" And just like what you just said there, like, when is it a state thing? When is it a national thing? But Trump responds by saying, "I feel that your agency," and I think the reporter works for NBC, not sure, I think they're owned by Comcast, "I feel that your agency is fraudulent in reporting, and you're insulting me with this question."
That's where, I mean, like, that's not helpful. Even if you feel that way, your feelings are not useful, and there's still an objective response available to that question. I don't know the answer, and I'm afraid it's likely maybe our president doesn't either, and that's his natural defensive mechanism. But that's just that's a great example. That's our leadership. You know what I mean? Like, in a time like this, it's just to still even see that, like, divide, like, staying alive isn't a political goal. It's not. It shouldn't be.
There are only so many different types of leaders. And, some leaders are good for change. Some leaders are good for growth. Some leaders are good for putting everybody together. I don't think that ramping up to where we are right now, our leadership is ready to maybe handle the serious outbreak of the type of virus when it's this real, right? Because we're still at the point, Mike, where we're debating on how real it is. And we could really use a trusted source and opinion, which we don't have. I understand I'm asking for a unicorn in a stable out back of my house. That's a good picture, right? But ultimately, I think we could use a different type of tone and leadership.
We can look ahead, right? And think about all kinds of scary and ominous things. And I can understand that some of those questions probably being put forth right now are so large, and it's just an overwhelming thing to even think about. But I don't know. I guess I just always fall back on the idea of when you have people in fear, even if this maybe is a horrible thing to say, but even if you can't save them, you can still give them comfort in their moments of fear. You know what I mean? And I think that's almost as important as saving people. You know what I mean? Because, perceived fear can turn into something very, very real, if not afforded that simple gesture of comfort. I'm not saying make false promises, right? But something I find great comfort in just knowing we're in this together. All of us. We're all human. And this is the realest showing of that phrase that we've probably kind of disregarded or not fully appreciated. It's right in our face now.
I think it's bringing together some communities, right? I mean, we might be doing our next show with a more grave tone. I hope that's not the case. We'll stay connected to our listeners. It's one of the beauties of being able to do a podcast, right? You can be quarantined and do what you do. But I think that there are a lot of impacts that I'm eager to maybe talk about in some slices of our episode today. I think that there's a couple that I'll talk about. I think one of the slices is that, people of service, we're going to have a very huge impact to our economy. And we always try to stay away from the political things. I think we should do so through this conversation aside from what we just said. But, the number of people who own restaurants, at least in my immediate area, who are opening and using their restaurants to feed people who are in the service industry so that they could eat.
That's pretty cool.
Restaurants, those types of things. At this point in time, we're not in a mandatory quarantine. But other than being outside, which is something that Atlanta seems to be tolerant to, we're pretty well self-imposed quarantine.
People are staying away. I mean, like bars and stuff aren't open, right?
No, not for the most part. I'm sure there's probably still like a couple of people who are, holding on for the end kind of thing. But I think it's largely
because it hasn't been like a statewide order, right? Like I'm pretty sure like Michigan and New York, that's statewide order at this point, right? That those, any learning institutions. But I think the next thing was bars and restaurants, right?
Yeah, that's what I meant. I wasn't trying to be critical or funny about the red state part. So really, ultimately, what I meant earlier when I said the Georgia's very red state is that they aren't very imposing when it comes to businesses from a political perspective. So
I just cynically just go to money and then figure no matter what, they'll stay open. So oversimplification of what you were saying, but same.
We haven't seen that though. I think that we really have seen
people are responding. Good. Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah. A lot of door-to-door help I see. So I'll be a member of a Facebook group here or there. Like for example, my living association HOA has a Facebook group that we all are a part of, and there are a couple people who have started very small grocery delivery and food delivery service for those who are affected. I'm sure DoorDash is blowing up because most of our places are still allowing takeout. But this is just kind of a little bit more like community thing, like you were saying earlier, like what we transitioned to here moments ago, is that I think that, there is a lot of example of the community reaching out. If we go under a advisement where we can't leave the house like New York has, where 100% of people can't go to work, I think that's where the economic questions become much larger. I think it becomes a bit more of an ordered type thing. And I think that the government and the taxes as such have to give a little bit. And again, I don't think we're ready to make those decisions economically.
I mean, you touched on a number of things there. I'd way rather talk about the idea of food and communities coming together. But the last thing you mentioned there, and I'm afraid this is going to lead into a very different discussion. So just tell me if we can't touch upon it. But numbers, business numbers, financial, outcomes, basically much, much better than I do. I don't like, how is this recoverable, dude? Like, how does a month or like 3 weeks of New York not making money, like how they just borrow all that money to get back? Like, I don't understand that the financial impact of something like this, dude. Like, I don't understand. Like, what's the precedent? What's the? I could tell by the look on your face that that's a whole different episode.
Well, I think when we decided to record this, we said we were going to kind of transition to transition. So you might be just after commercial break, but let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that is a good kind of like next silo to talk about. Understand that I'm an armchair economist, right? So there's a lot of people who have much more academic and professional how it affects the economy, but let's divide that into like three categories. One is your housing, right? So that's mortgage and rent. One is your security, meaning like the things that you need to move around in your life and to protect your family. Okay. So don't think so much about like, security cameras and and
yeah.
and stuff like maybe some preppers do in this way, but like your actual security of yourself. And then I think the last part of it is like the commerce that you would spend into the economy. Okay, so part of like all of that you just talked about, all of the dollars, if you're Scrooge McDuck and you're diving into all of the dollars that exist in America, it's a big pool. That number is however many $1 trillion exist in that pool that you could actually dive into if you could collect them all and put them in one spot. What ends up happening is that there's a hole in the pool. Okay. And so that hole starts to leak money and it's not recoverable. And that's kind of like what you see on Wall Street. And that's what you see if you're somebody who has a 401k or investments and you're looking at your account and you have no idea how to understand losing 15 or 20% of your investment over an afternoon, or getting it back a different time. So that's the hole in that pool itself, right? Like you're one person who's in that pool. Now imagine that everybody in your neighborhood, in your county, in your state, in the United States have to be able to get into that pool. Okay. And they have to be able to swim in that pool together. It's leaking out of the bottom and we all need to kind of be in there to different regards. Some of us need to have very deep swims because that's where we are. Some of us are just in and out a little bit. So those of us who are in and out a little bit of that like pool, they are going to have the hardest time. And so I do think that the federal government will release some tax things. Big business is typically handled. Small business and small people becomes a challenge. So there are so many people who exist that don't have more than 2 weeks of pay. And these are the people that I'm talking about in that pool, right? So like they have to go jump in that pool that's leaking.
Sorry, but I mean, some shit is fucked, right? Like, I'm sorry, but
unprecedented.
Yeah, like we could talk about this forever, but we don't have any idea. Like, we know it's going to be bad. How bad? How many businesses? How many? Like,
Sure.
There's no way to accurately predict that, but it's going to happen. I mean, those jobs, right? Like,
jobs is the next thing. I'll talk to you. I'll give you my diatribe on jobs. If that's a little bit of like what the show is to talk about the points of the impact.
Well, we're gonna talk about all the things that we're thinking about right now. We got to find some positivity and some like uplifting things to talk about too, because anyone can turn on the news right now and hear all this shit. Like, I'm sorry, but
we did. We first talked about the community.
I know, and we'll continue to. All this money stuff, like, let's get this out of the way. Money and jobs, let's get this out of the way. Because,
well, I think that you got to give me jobs as neutral, right? Because the explanation that I might give you is negative, but the result is going to be positive.
Let's start with the tough side of jobs, and then we'll maybe get a little bit more personal. And we're gonna start off talking about all these jobs that they're gone, they're not coming back, and you know what? They're probably not going to be there in 2 months. It's just,
I think the businesses are what close, and a lot of those ones that you're talking about, that the jobs are not there and they're gone, right? All the fitness studios, all the nail shops, all those pieces, and largely that's what we kind of talked about when we were talking about the economics part. I think that there is a transition in America in jobs, though, and maybe you and I are fortunate because we work from home, but I do think that what's going to happen through this process is that more companies in America are going to realize how to set people up to work from home. And I think that 9 to 5 doesn't work with two parents working. I don't think that it works with childcare. I don't think that it works with a lot of the like modern family responsibilities that we have now. Big businesses have been actually realizing this for the past decade, straight up, in allowing people to work from home. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of companies now that are going to be able to use things like Microsoft Office 365. Zoom is something that's very popular. If you notice, like last night, I had a kind of a meeting with some friends over a Zoom conference we used to use to record this podcast, actually. Goddamn
we
Zoom.
gave up on it a month or two ago because it was so crappy. And now Zoom is blowing up.
It turns out having a drink over a screen with your friends, which I think is something that our listeners, hey, if you haven't done it yet, like pause and text your friends right now. Somebody, 3 people, 5 people, or however, and use your devices this evening to meet up and have whatever it might be, a conversation with your friends.
Shut up. That's cool. Honestly, like, that's really kind of
you haven't done that?
odd, but that sounds awesome. Like, I love doing this with you.
Yeah.
That's where we're at, man. Like a month ago, I think about it, a bunch of my buddies would have been like, dude, I don't got time for that. But like, let's get creative. We're so fortunate that we actually do have these utilities, right? Like,
we do that a little bit. I guess a lot of it's just you and me. But let's name this, because we have people who are listening right now. Maybe some of them are new listeners because they're consuming podcast after podcast while they're home. But let's talk about some of the things that you and I use technology wise to communicate. First, there's there's Zoom conference, which we talked about. You could Google that and download that. We use something, you and I, is called Marco Polo. That's an app. It goes across iPhone and Android devices. And Marco Polo allows you to record a video message and then send it to a group of people so that you don't have to all be on like interacting with each other at the same time. That's something that's pretty cool. You and I've used that probably for about a year now to talk about the show and to.
And what's the Google version of that one?
Oh, good question. I think it's called Google Duo. And I think that Google Duo is native on all Android devices. So like if you have an Android device, iPhone, of course, has FaceTime. Dude, you should be impressed that I didn't mention iPhone first. How proud are you?
I am actually. I'm really proud of you, dude. Like, I don't even know. Just shows the state you're in, bro. Like, I'm surprised you even thought of Android.
Get with your people and see what of those apps that we just mentioned they have, and schedule something, because it makes sense. Last night we had some friends. I wouldn't say anything on the show I wouldn't say to their face, but like I was having some drinks with some of them last night, and so
hold on. You mean like you were around each other, or you were doing this?
We're doing this. We're using FaceTime because
so no mics or anything like that, right? Like it's just laptop, right? Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, we use mics and headphones, but that's for our listeners' sake. In theory, the audio quality is supposed to be better, but it's not an integral part of any of these setups, to my knowledge, right? They all will work just off your laptop, and I think even all of them work off the phone nowadays, right? Like,
I would say your phone is easier for most of them, save Zoom. And depending on how many people you're going to have in your conversation. So there's a couple instances that I've seen of this, which like, first is like the friend meetups thing, but no, I was over screens. I was using my iPad. We were using FaceTime. So just
so what, like how long were you doing this for?
Probably like an hour and 10 minutes. Enough, like 2 drinks, 3 drinks.
So were you talking the whole time? Like, just like you were. I'm sorry, it's not. I don't know why it seems weird to me. You know why it seems weird to me? Because I'm imagining like 2 couples, like you and a buddy talking for hours or whatever. Like, that doesn't seem weird to me. But when it's like 2 people squeezing into a screen, and it's just a little different. But
no, it's definitely. So Anna has done a couple as well herself, but it's always just her. I mean, I make a little cameo, or she makes a cameo. Okay. Perhaps.
But like last night for a couple drinks, it's you and another buddy, right?
2 other buddies.
Oh,
yeah.
So
I think it works with groups of 3 or better. It's a little weird if it's just one-on-one, to be honest.
If you have a gathering, multiple people, it's just like conversations, right? Like
I think pick up 3 to 5, and I would probably use that Google Duo app that we mentioned, just because I know how easy it is and it's free and it's simple. But 3 to 5 people, again, I'm a couple social distancing meetings in, but it's pretty fun because it gives space for you to go to the bathroom. One of the guys that was on the line last night has kids. So like he went and put his daughter to bed. You know, we just kind of kept hanging out. And again, our choice was to have some drinks. So we all had like a couple glasses of whiskey.
Oh, I'm sure. I was going to say, what sort of brown liquor did you fancy, dudes? consume. So what'd you pour into your glass, Rye?
I'm drinking McKenna.
Oh, nice.
But they make just a regular bourbon that's actually relatively inexpensive. I bought 1.5 gallons of it in my prepping world, which maybe is another good silo. I went and prepped a little bit the other day. And so I got my 1.5 gallons and then I put it in a decanter. And so McKenna, McKenna. Good price.
Yeah, I've definitely seen it before. But yeah, it's not your corner store. Where's McKenna from?
It's it's Heaven Hill Distillery. They're part of Heaven Hill Distillery, who owns Elijah Craig and
a bunch of others. Yeah.
Yeah. I went there with my dad. It was a great one. Bourbon Trail.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Bourbon Trail. Hope for the Bourbon Trail.
You mentioned your silo. Ryan's a country boy. For those of you who don't know what a silo is, those are those big silver cylinders in farm country. They're full of shit, and it's for like rainy days. Usually I think they're full of like corn and grains and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. I guess
that's a real offensive, presumptuous. It was more to make fun of you than to imply our listeners didn't know what silos were.
It did feel personal. I think the tone will show that it was personal. You could hit that rewind 30 seconds button and hear Mike's tone. But the silos that I deal with today actually have way more to do with flowcharts, which is probably not, when I say silo, that's what I think of. But no, you're right.
Yeah, no one wants to hear. We're not talking about flowcharts today, Ryan. We're not talking about flowcharts.
That's a whole different podcast that puts you to sleep, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Where I'm from, though, silos aren't like necessarily a thing. I'm from soybean America. It's
that's fair.
Low-lying crops very quickly trucked away.
Hey everybody, it's Mike from the show. Just want to take a minute to express our appreciation for any and all feedback you're able to provide. Not just for prior shows, but we're also looking for any recommendations you have for future shows, whether it's on content, format, but especially guests. If you know someone who's led a life that's interesting to you and they've now found themselves in this place of happiness, pass their name along. We're happy to reach out. We're happy to be rejected, but it doesn't hurt to try. As always, if you don't mind, take a minute, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and above all else, thanks so much for listening.
This prepping, that people at least should be partaking in. And in my experience, it just seems like to varying degrees. I was going to say varying. I don't know if that's redundant. It's not redundant, but so for example, my family, I'm sure I've mentioned it on the show a few times, but so that download we get in Italy, that's my family. My sister, her husband, and her daughter live in Vicenza, which is in northern Italy, which is, we're not going to get real into it. But it's the worst place to be right now for coronavirus. So they live in Italy. My other sister lives in the UK. She has 2 young daughters. I have another sister, who lives in Michigan in Ferndale, right around the block from Ryan's house, even though he's not there right now.
Airbnb, you could rent it if you like. We'll talk later.
My brother also lives in Michigan. My parents were in Mexico 3 weeks ago, and have since made it back to the U.S. and are up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And I live in Hawaii. The reason why I'm giving our geographic locations is because it seems like the preparations are somewhat dictated by where you're living. And it's kind of scary to see your sister. We have this amazing group chat, which offers, like, you talking about the video, socializing. I can't imagine how amazing that is right now for you, because I've had this, family group chat going, and just the comfort. We're not just direct one-to-one texting, but all of the family, and getting to see my mom's response to my sister's texts and these updates and things going on, because it's scary when you know that your family is like preparing for a 30-day lockdown. I'm a 38-year-old dude. I mean, I know some people who are prepared for that sort of stuff. I'm not one of them. No one ever taught me how to do that stuff. I'll go out and get a chest cooler and fill it with stuff. Like, huh? I don't got no room for a chest cooler, and I wouldn't even know what stuff to put in it. I'd put a bunch of like chicken fingers in there, My sister in the UK went to a similar extreme. She's got 2 young kids at home, but the UK is I don't know what their enforcement is right now, but a similar level of go out and get a freezer chest and load it up. My sister in Michigan already had a full freezer chest in the basement, 4 months ago. So this just gave her an excuse to stuff some more stuff in it. But yeah,
in other words, she was already preparing.
She was already prepped for pretty much any. She's a planner and a shopper by nature. So, but like out here in Hawaii, I don't see people taking those actions, and that's a little concerning. But it's also I can't help but think that some of the reaction to like you get a region like this where I've been here for 5 years and. If I think about it, I'll be able to name at least 5 times over that time where we've basically had the state of Hawaii telling us like, something really bad is about to happen. Like whether it's, there's an incoming missile. Sorry. Volcanoes don't really bother us here on Oahu, but they're huge on other parts of the state. Hurricanes, a category 5 hurricane. When you grow up in Michigan isn't something you really worry about. But when you move to Hawaii and they tell you like, no, there's going to be like 100+ mile an hour winds coming. What I'm getting at is I feel like these Hawaiians, they're resilient, man. And not just like, they're not stubborn. It's not like, there's a hurricane coming, I'm not moving. They're just like, listen, we go through crazy stuff regularly. I think their ability to prepare, or either that or they're already just more stocked than I am, because I don't see the same like kind of panicked response out here that I'm at least seeing on the news and elsewhere. And again, that's probably due to the media a little bit, but it comforts me. It comforts me. It really does. At the same time, I'm like, I was talking to my wife earlier today. I mean, I cannot imagine there's a greater concentration of people coming from other countries than there is in specifically, you got New York City. Los Angeles brings a lot of visitors, man. But like what I'm getting at is the Asian, whether it's from China or Japan or other parts of Asia into Hawaii or into the States via Hawaii, the cruise ships, all this stuff that people were worried about, like at the very onset of this, I'm almost starting to wonder, like, if Corona was maybe in Hawaii a little while ago, maybe it was around earlier than it was in Idaho, because we're not regionally close to China, but man, like the visitors from China, I don't know what I'm talking about. That's just me talking about basic experience and like personal observations, and also being optimistic, man. Like I can't wake up or like keep stepping forward being like, man, I have to stay in my house for 3 months and then I might come out and get coronavirus. Like I'd be more eager to get this stuff and get it over with. My fear is transmission. I don't want to hurt anyone else. That's all I'm worried about. Like it really is, man. Like I'm not saying I'm invisible or I can handle this, like, because I'm scared that is the mindset of a group of our population, and the amount of danger that they're doing and harm to others is just, that's the moral, ethical part of this whole dilemma. None of us want to stay inside. I think some of us need to varying degrees, but none of us want to. And I don't know if the 16-year-old Mike would have been as socially responsible as the 38-year-old version is. And I'm afraid that that's still part of our population that's not obeying, but like it's getting to a point where it's not as much of a choice I think the next thing that we're going to start to see is some like social like chastising, whether it's for businesses that remain open and just, it's interpreted as greed, or people that are out wandering around acting like no, nothing's no big deal. Like, I hate to say it, but we haven't really seen ugliness yet.
I think it's all, well, first of all, it's unprecedented, right? And so we talked a bit about economics, and one of the things that economists always enjoy is that they don't make predictions, they make comments on what has happened.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So one of the things regarding all of this being a first time situation, to first comment on like the scarcity type situation, I think, certainly Hawaii versus elsewhere, is that you who live on an island are always living in a certain amount of scarcity. So perhaps the threat of scarcity being imposed on you it's not as bothersome as like a culture that's there, whether you're from Hawaii or not, right?
We're not getting off the rock anyways. And as long as they don't stop sending stuff here. But
I think, and I hope that we can trust in our actual infrastructure. Let's separate all the bullshit and all the feelings. But there is an actual federal infrastructure that's designed, not perfectly, but it is designed to support, I think, what we are facing. I hope that we move, just to kind of like dance across the subjects of conversation you presented there.
Yeah, sorry, I just went on a rant. My apologies.
No, you're good. I hope that we can start to socially chastise people who don't pay attention to the risk of virus. I think this is something that, it's probably going to be a new norm, at least in most of our foreseeable lives. I think that we are also, just like when we went through the housing crisis as medium age adults, now it's 10 to 15 years later than that.
Yeah.
We learn to protect our economy a little bit differently. And I think that our economy will be protected. We didn't get to close that conversation out, but I do think that that's part of what's going to happen. I think that we are going to learn very quickly post this virus scare, saturation, vaccine, whatever the end is of this, as long as it's not the end of the race. Because I do think it's more serious than is being reported, just to be honest with you. I don't think that there's any way that you could look at it if you are a numbers person and not realize that. I think the question is to how many people that it actually kills versus hospitalizes. And I think that there is a very real risk that we don't have the medical infrastructure to handle the
quantity.
Because, and this is very true if you're listening to this on the way home from spring break pissed off, because Joe went to spring break, Joe works at a grocery store. When he gets home, somehow he contracted it unknowingly. Joe never had a symptom.
No.
And then passed it to his girlfriend's grandmother for some reason. And that cost her life. To be clear about how viruses spread without it being a scare tactic, because I just want to, explain it. That's what I think that we will now understand differently than we've ever understood before.
Yeah. I mean, a little over a week ago, I want to say it was last Wednesday. Basically, it was escalating to the point where the NBA was going to take extreme measures and start to consider playing games without fans. At this point, they had not yet said, we're doing that. All right. So this is before March Madness got canceled. This is before the opening day of baseball got pushed back. Basically, what went down is there's a player on the Utah Jazz. His name is Rudy Gobert. He had been having some symptoms, consistent with the flu, known to the team, and early in the day, basically had been taken for testing. Well, midway through that day, there's an interview that he's performing, and it's a group interview. In other words, he's sitting at a table, and there's 5 or 6, I don't know, to be honest, there could have been 10, 15 reporters in the room, but there's a number of microphones in front of him and whatnot, and I'm sure they're talking about a million things. But I think at one point, someone kind of nonchalantly, because this is where, a week ago, things were still kind of nonchalant, brought up something about coronavirus. He was overly confident in his response, and I'm being gentle here compared to most people, and made jokes about it. Physically made jokes about it. And by physically made jokes, I mean as he was departing the conference, he stood up, mind you, Rudy Gobert, NBA basketball player. This dude's like 7 feet tall. I think he's like 6'10" or something. Stands up, leans over the table towards the reporters, waves his arm, and then touches every single microphone.
Ouch.
A couple hours later, they're starting the game. Fans are in the arena. The teams are on the court. They're about to tip off. They get the results of his morning test back. By the way, he's not on the floor. They didn't let him out. Basically, the only time the team, it seems like, really let him out publicly was to go have that conference. Otherwise, it seems like he was pretty sequestered around his team. He was sick, but it was like the start of a flu, maybe. So he was going to play through it.
Mm-hmm.
Results came back, coronavirus. They literally, man, doctor ran through the tunnel, ran out to an official talked with the owners of the team real quick. They're like, yep. What then basically happened is the commissioner of the NBA had been a game or two earlier that day, and then there was another one going on had started just prior to that one. Commissioner came out and said, this game is not happening. Fans go home. So they cleared the stadium. I can't imagine how crazy that was. The game's about to start and then an announcement comes on. Like, I don't think they said anything about coronavirus. They didn't say anything. They just said, sorry, you have to leave. Tonight's game is canceled. So the next thing you know, basically, Rudy Gobert is identified as like patient zero. That's such a horrible phrase, but in the NBA or in the sports world in the United States, he was the first professional athlete to be identified as having contracted the virus. But within 24 hours, tests came back that Gobert's teammate and his airplane ride-along buddy, basically they spent a lot of time together. They're the captains of the team. Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, his teammate, was also confirmed to have contracted. Hindsight 2020, right? I mean, this dude, Rudy Gobert, is just getting pulled apart by the limbs. You know, like he intentionally did something or this or that. It's really, I mean, obviously, we're all looking at it now saying, you idiot, what were you thinking? Why would you touch the microphone? Why, but like, that word unprecedented gets thrown around a lot, but like to be a professional athlete in the prime of your career, most of us don't know a feeling of invincibility like they do in general. You know what I mean? Like their whole life, they are untouchable. They are superhuman. I mean, the closest thing I think that we know to superhumans. And he got it. That basically set off a chain of events, in my opinion, in all of sports, to where the NBA they let the games of that night continue. But I think the next determination was like, they went right over let's not have fans attend. They just suspended the season. But the NCAA, college sports, they delayed. They took like, I don't know if it was 2 full days before they canceled their tournaments. I'm laughing because the NCAA is so notoriously like just
obtuse.
I was just going to say just greedy, money hungry bastards. But yeah, what you said is way more appropriate. The NCAA is always identified as basically trying to make as much money off its athletes is absolutely possible, which, I hate to say it, but yeah, that's what most businesses do. The issue is that their producers are usually like 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. So it was perceived by the public that the NCAA was basically willing to forego the safety of their athletes in order to start what is without question the largest event of their calendar year. I mean, not just viewers, but the financial aspects of March Madness. Like, think about that. As an organization, the NCAA, right? I don't know how much they put in their pocket when March Madness is over, but that's not going to be there this year. To oversimplify it, it's just like, well, last year we made $500 million. This year we made $0. There's going to be an effect of that.
I think it's unprecedented. I think there's a risk for having the like gotcha culture to Rudy Gobert. He's a good ball player. I don't think that anything is going to happen to him. I think that sports in the United States also had an inside line. We were talking about like federal perspective and all that kind of stuff. Somebody talked to the league and somebody talked to the NCAA, which is good. And we should have faith in that because we, again, might be leading towards some sort of federal lockdown. But somebody spoke to the sports component of our world and shut it down. You didn't mention baseball maybe because you weren't as big of a baseball fan, but similar thing happened in baseball.
I love baseball. I just don't talk about it as much.
Right. But so ultimately same thing happened in spring training in baseball too. And kind of a similar type of a thing. I do think that again, we are leading up to, and we're trying to learn whether it be like what seems to be idiocracy of him tapping on microphones or us shifting very quickly to like not being able to be in groups of more than 10, or I can even see some text coming across in the, hour or so we've been recording here that are talking about being under a little bit of like a militant type shutdown type situation. Here's what I sincerely hope. And we're going to like walk across the bridge. There's another farm term for you into the next silo is, that I hope that if and when we do show some national force, which will likely be the National Guard, that it doesn't become Kent State University. And I do think that there is a high risk for that, very quickly, just given the status of conflict in America.
Hey everybody, it's Mike from the show. What a wild time it is. Corona pandemic is worldwide. Seems like an awesome opportunity to catch up. Not just on our podcast, but on all kinds of other stuff you've been putting off. This is a time of concern. That doesn't mean we all need to be fearful. Keep your heads up, look out for one another, be responsible, practice social distancing.
Don't get me wrong, my bullet showed up today in the mail as
Hold
well.
on, before we go there.
That's right. Shout out to
I don't want you to think that this is a transition to that topic. I sincerely mean that, Ryan. But what you just touched upon is something I mentioned a little bit earlier, in that we're not seeing full on scared or the full on ugly side of human beings. And I hope that doesn't show up. You know what I mean? Like, but I'm not naive. I'm not naive. Like, when's the looting start? Like, when does Buddy got to go get a new big TV and he knows no one's working at Best Buy? And you mentioned Kent State National Guard. Like, that's more of a us versus them type thing. But like, we're all in this together. That we all look around and like realize we're in this together. Because it only takes one asshole to really start something very, very different.
Which, to be clear, is my fear, is that one asshole, like, right? Or group of assholes, however that works. I just think we're at a power kick situation right now.
I guess what you just said is our biggest advantage right now, right? Like, a group of 10 people outside are assholes right now. You don't have to do anything. Like, basically, that's a really mean, harsh thing to say, but we live in a place where, you can protest and express yourself. But sometimes those types of protests and large gatherings, they escalate and they turn into other, I keep bringing up Kent State. That's a very, very special example of I don't think police brutality is a
National Guard.
Is a National Guard. But I just mean like enforcement to the public. At least in this situation, though, I don't see the opportunity for it to be done in mass.
Yeah, I don't think we immediately shift to violence either in a situation where there's a virus that is the challenge.
Yeah, it's a little different, right?
It's not anger at the very real cop gang versus the street gang, right? And so that's a very real thing, which is a whole different episode that we probably won't do, just to be honest, because it's not the show.
That's not really.
But there's a powder keg of emotions in environments, and if we start to deploy camouflage, which is what we do, right? So there's like blue, right? There's officers, whatever your relationship are with police officers across the United States. And imagine how many different relationships there are in so many different places in the United States. And then there's camouflage. And so I think that there's a difference. Who knows what that difference is? And I think that's why the Kent State reference came up.
Well, that's why it's kind of a scary thing. You know what I mean? To apply a Band-Aid to an enormous wound. Don't you think that's like inevitable? Don't you think that's like, I don't mean the clashing or anything like that, but don't you just think that's what's next? Yeah. I mean, I'm at a point, like I said, and I keep telling people this, and I don't mean to be, like you said, you know, I'm not depreciating the seriousness of the virus, but the way that you survive a virus is you can run from it and avoid it and never get it, ideally, or you get it, absorb it, your body learns how to fight it, you survive it, and then you're immune to it. Which it's different for everyone. But man, I'd give anything to know I was on like day 12, and in a couple days I should be looking a little bit more immune, or at least that's what they're telling us. But yeah, this hiding and avoiding and stuff like that, it's just not, it's not in most of our nature. So it's a very uncomfortable situation to be in.
Yeah, I think that's where it crosses into pandemonium, because we don't know that we're on day 12 of 14 or 21 or so on and so forth. So I've seen a little bit of it here. You know, we went to Costco before it opened the other day. We were in line and walked in and just kind of bought like a big pile of stuff so that we could stay sequestered ourselves. I also share your fear, I think biggest fear, which is infecting others. I have asthma, so I think that that's something that I also am concerned about as far as being a little bit more exposed.
I've known you for 20 plus years. I didn't know you had asthma.
Yeah, well, let me say this. You know, I use asthma medications. Part of that, I think, has to do with living in such a high allergy environment, which the Southeast is very much so right now in the same time frame. So this places more emphasis on the healthcare system, which
your allergies are going off to begin right now, right? I mean, in a month, the spring, right, would be really, really bad for you, I bet.
Right. And like, let's just be honest, we have enough food to handle America. It might be weird and you might have to eat some shit that you don't want to eat, or you might be hungry for a couple nights, but we have enough food in America to feed America. Here's the thing that we might not have enough of, which is the medical care. And so going back to like what I think is most important to me, because I know we're getting close to the end of the episode, right? But like ultimately what's important to me is that I can keep myself away from other people, to not get infected myself, which is not the primary of my thought, but B, so that I don't become some kind of a carrier, because very clearly that seems to be the part of like how this gets spread. And so I guess if you're listening, maybe you take my opinions under consideration, but that's how I'm acting myself. I try not to share too much of that, this being such a journalistic show.
No, you're right.
You know, but
I think like that's what we should all be doing, right? Like lead by example, man.
That's what we're not doing, though. I'm gonna give you an example, a bit of a diatribe, I guess. But I ran into a friend today out walking the dog. Probably listen to this. I don't think he's a dick. I like him, but he had just returned from Syracuse, New York, right? Just returned. The first night of his business trip, he was thrown out of his hotel because they closed his hotel and then referred him to another one. I don't know what the circumstances are of his job, but he didn't return home for a couple nights later. And now I just ran into him. We did not fist pound. We did not Joe Biden elbow pound or anything like that. But what I do want to share is that like he could be incubating illness. We have to be very real about this, that somehow gets passed to me, that somehow gets passed to somebody who I contact. Because I do have to go to the grocery store, right? Again, I don't think we're in risk of running out of food. I'm in risk of running out of toilet paper.
It's up to you to break that chain though, bro. Like, right? Like that's,
it's up to everybody.
Well, exactly. Like we all have to take our part to break that chain. Like that dude put you in this position.
That's right.
Well, so now you have to, here's one for you. I'll give some details here, but the gist of it is for my work, sometimes I get called and I have to do stuff on real short notice.
Mm-hmm.
That occurred the other night. I basically got a new case that involved the examination of a vehicle a vehicle that was involved in a collision. And I do accident reconstruction as part of my forensic work. And okay, the vehicle is going to be available for a limited time. It's being released tomorrow. I need you there at this time. Okay. Oftentimes when we do these types of things, you can imagine there are other interested parties. So it's a group, a joint inspection. There's multiple people going to be present.
Sure.
I know how many people there are that do what I do here regionally. So I know if there's a group examination going on, that they're probably, at least someone's coming in from the mainland.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Sure.
I get there. People are being pretty responsible. But I look at the other guy who does what I do. I said, where are you out of? Because I don't know him personally. From the mainland. Really?
Oh.
They let you in here? Said I got in on Sunday. So then I had to spend the next 2 hours in pretty close quarters with someone from the Pacific Northwest. And I don't want to go further there because I don't mean like, I'm going to point fingers in this and that. But now it's on me. Now it's on me because I live in a pretty, country part of Hawaii. So, interaction is by no means forced. Yesterday's interaction was forced, but I have to break that chain, just like you, right? Like I have to step up my game.
That's right.
Can't do anything to prevent my wife. I talk about her all the time on the show. She is a teacher, but she teaches at a charter school. This charter school, for years, has been incorporating virtual teaching. So as the rest of the country, and I like this transition because it brings things back to a positive place. As the rest of the country and places like our home state of Michigan have shut down the schools, I think we really take for granted, like, okay, they could just teach remotely. Like, no, they can't. You need to learn how to do that. You need to learn how to effectively communicate in that setting because that's a very unique setting. And it's one thing when you're a 20-year-old college student and you need this class you're going to hone in. It's a little bit different when you're trying to teach second graders,
Sure.
reading and writing, right? Like they're sitting there, they're at home, their other brothers probably in the background watching cartoons and they got to hone in on some teaching, some lessons, some study.
We need to pivot here, right? And so I hope that as we pivot away from some of the things that we've glommed onto over the previous decades, that we understand that dynamic a little more that you're talking about, right?
Well,
because that's the part of what not only our show is about like changing that dynamic career that you have or listening to your heart or any of the things that you might hear in any of our interviews, but understanding your own personal responsibility, A, to everybody else, like what you talk about with the self-quarantine, but B, to understand to be open-hearted to a different way in investing, in Nicole's example, to a different way to do things before they must be done. That's something that we all could learn from, right?
That is what this show's about. That is what we've been talking about, like how to do what you want to do, or maybe do things that have been done, but to do them in a different way, right? Like that's the whole idea of conventioNOT, and the idea that at some point we kind of forced it. Like, I don't know about you, but for me, working remotely was 12 years ago when I was at a big company. I just really didn't want to show up early on Monday mornings. And that's a horrible thing to admit, but it is the truth. Not because I was hungover or this or that. It was because I just wasn't my best self on Monday morning. And I didn't want to be that guy around my coworkers, which is a Mike problem. But in my opinion, I found this amazing, not workaround, but solution to that problem. Because ultimately my coworkers didn't need to see Monday Mike either. And my bosses got the same product from Mike. So what was initially kind of an obstacle became something that everyone was pretty accepting of, all right, just get your work done. Keep in touch. We don't need you coming into the office every day. Let's put it this way. Back then it was, work from home, right? With the air quotes.
Talking about the anecdote of not being a morning person, not being able to show up on Monday morning and that detracting, right? So like we have all these personalities that we know we've dealt with forever. I know that what business is going to realize is that they don't need to pay for all the overhead of those big buildings to house Sally in her cubicle when she just can't get there on time, right? Like being able to buy her a laptop for $600 and then pay some sort of reasonable like service.
Way cheaper than that square footage.
And it's not just a dollar and cents thing. We're all waiting for somebody to turn over the other leaf, no matter which side of like the political or tax or class system you sit on in the United States. I fucking hope this is it, bro. I hope that that's what we kind of close the first coronavirus show, because I suspect we're going to have another one. We've got a guest who's been flying in and out of hot zones come up here pretty quick, right?
2 guests coming up here pretty quick. To my knowledge, we don't have any cancellations, so you were really sweet in saying I was ahead of the curve. And I think I'd be lying to say, but I do have a penchant for making things better for myself. That's something I've been very forceful about most of my life, which sounds like, yeah, I'm an asshole.
It's not selfish.
But, well, I mean, that's what I mean. Like, guess what? Everyone here is going to be happier if Mike's happy. I'm not saying I dictate your happiness, but I'm saying
that truth applies to everybody though, right?
Yeah, exactly. But that's what I mean is like, if we're kind of allowed to be our best selves or, you know, preferred selves, and it doesn't step on others. You know what I mean? Like that to me, that's a big part of what we're always trying to talk about on the show. You know, like that's the happy part of success. Don't get me wrong. You know, success, if quantified by a dollar amount, might mean having an awful job, but making a crap ton of money. And in order to be happy at my job, doesn't matter what the job is, you got to tweak it sometimes. And sometimes you have to, you know, we're not just talking about our jobs anymore. We're talking about all of our lives. And this isn't going to end tomorrow. It's not going to end the next day. It's not going to end the next day. Some of us have nice, huge mansions. It's a lot different than being isolated in a small studio. Mm-hmm. But now is the time to be selfish in a way that it doesn't affect others. Guess what? For once, we are all in this shit together. Doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are, what color you are, where you live. We all have to do the same thing. We're all supposed to do the same thing tomorrow. I find a lot of like beauty and like touchy feelings in that. Hopefully that doesn't turn into something like nasty and awful, but in my lifetime, we've never all been told to do one thing. My whole life, never once has the whole world been told to do something. So as scary as this is, I have a little excitement too. That transition you're talking about, what's next? I don't know if we're going to see that in a month or 2 months or 3 months or a year from now. But I do think that the effect of this will be inevitable change. You know, and unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of tragedy with it as well. There's going to be a lot of lives lost. And I'm not going to follow that up with a but. I think with that tragedy, we're going to grow. We're going to survive. And I think better things are ahead.
Yeah, that's a hell of a closing to the episode. I think really enheartening, right? Like, I think that if you are well balanced and you're listening to like what Mike said there, I think that you have the ability to take that in and to motivate yourself. And so if you're not that person, and I could distill what you just said, Mike, is that out of tragedy births opportunity, right? And
always.
I think that my parting statement, I'm going to say, is to seize this opportunity right now to figure out how to sit in your own silence, because there's probably not going to be much silence for yourself. And I'm not going to be as bold, nor am I as experienced enough to say that you should meditate or pray or walk outside by yourself, social distance observed, or write or record or play if you're a musician. And I think that those lists could go on and on and on. But what I do want to encourage you to do is that in this time that you have that's forced away from the place where you probably have to go to earn money, understanding that you need that money that comes from that place, you should be able to adopt something that's your own discipline. And you might learn what this show is like really about, right? Which is that it's the discipline dedicated towards happiness. And it's the discipline towards, like what Mike said about recognizing opportunity out of tragedy, that makes people happy. And there's not many universals. There is a universal that you should wash your hands umpteen times a day right now. There is a universal.
Yeah, there's universals right now. There are actually. That's what I mean. It's pretty unique.
There's another universal, which is that, like, if you pursue happiness, you will actually find it. It's really just this weird thing. And so much of that, of course, is tied to jobs. This episode has given us an opportunity to talk about like these different silos. But what my advice, closing down here, is that you take this time, adopt something that you wanted to adopt in your day by day habit, and stick to it from now through beyond the time when the virus is relaxed, or
why not?
Whatever it might be.
Why not? Netflix isn't a discipline. Don't get me wrong. It's a distraction and it's nice, but yeah, we should all be able to come out of this, us survivors, better. So take some time to make the effort. Let's all better ourselves.
You said this is a transition. Am I transition episode, transition time, transition week? Am I still closing these shows out? Am I still giving the digits, or are you ready to announce our social media?
I talk enough. If you let me go, yeah, we might be here for another 15 minutes.
We try to keep the episodes around an hour if we can. And I think that gives people time to like slice the episodes up in pieces too. So you can do 20 minutes at a time. We have our own commercials, which you probably already heard a couple of today. They're going to remind you to do what I'm going to remind you to do right now, which is subscribe to us, please, on your own podcast channel. Share us, share our insights, share what we do. We're journalists and we're aspiring to help people learn about other people who are happy. Today, you stumbled into an episode which is one-on-one with Mike and I. Most of what you'll find on our channel is going to have a lot more to do with interviews and people who are doing really unconventional things and finding life in unconventional ways. And so that's what we talk about. We're at conventioNOT _podcast anywhere on the internet, any of the social feeds. And the way you advertise a podcast is that you ask people to follow and you ask them to review. So please take a second. If you've listened to a couple of our episodes, come out there, review us, and do it wherever you're listening. It just takes a second. You're probably at home. You're not maybe in a car like you usually are when you listen to us, which I think is a little bit different dynamic. So yeah, that's it. I'm Mike.
Thanks, Ryan.
I'm not Mike. You're Mike. I'm Ryan.
I'll be Ryan.
Cool. We're together. conventioNOT. Thanks for listening.
All love,
today.
brother. Talk soon.